How's it going, guys? Over this previous weekend, I had a chance to check out some of the panels and news that came out of the Pax South convention they held down in San Antonio. It kind of got me thinking. I'd like to start a series on the channel where I would actually review, share some of the ongoings from these events. Because myself personally, I really like watching the panels. I really like seeing what comes out of them. Mainly because if you follow them, you really get to see uh, some really good insight from the developers, the design teams. You get to see kind of the behind the scenes of some of our favorite games out there. They also have game announcements, release trailers, game news. So following those conventions, can be kind of entertaining, as well as, like I said, kind of insightful because it's always cool to see what the developers were thinking when they were doing something or why they did something in a particular game. So with that said, before we get into the PAX South convention, that will be the first video in this series. Uh, kind of go over the gameplay here. It looks like we are playing the strike on the moon, going after Mr. Rancor himself, Fogoth. I'm sure George Lucas will enjoy that reference. Uh, and yeah, back to the event itself. Those of you who are not 100% familiar with what PAX is, it is the Penny Arcade Expo. Originally started off up in Seattle with PAX Prime. Then they do one in Boston for PAX East. They have an event called PAX Australia in Melbourne, and then, like I mentioned, PAX South down here in San Antonio. Uh, the really cool thing with the PAX conventions that I think, anyways, and it kind of separates itself from maybe like the E3s and things like that, is they actually include tabletop games as well as card games or role playing games, which is I think is kind of cool. I've never really been big into role playing games or card games. I certainly enjoy a good game of Risk anytime anybody wants to play with me, as long as they leave me in Australia to our own devices. But I think that's cool that they do share or show off those other types of games because as much as we would like to think it, there are more than just video games in the world that people play, and they're actually some of them are actually worth playing and checking out themselves. So I think that's kind of cool. Uh, I will say, kind of going over the events and the announcements and news that came out of it, there was a lot of PC games shown off. Unfortunately, I'm not a big PC gamer. I certainly would like to be, but I don't have the setup right now. I just have a laptop, which will run most Steam games, but some of the games I'm just not capable of playing right now. Um, but there was quite a few. I would say of all of them that they showed off, there was several that really kind of caught my eye, and I thought were actually really pretty cool looking. One being a game called ah called Dreadnought. Um, Easiest way for me to kind of describe that game to you would be take World of Tanks, and instead of tanks, you have big, amazing looking spaceships while fighting in even bigger, amazing looking arenas. Um, the game, the ships you use come in all different, you know, classes with different abilities, different tactics that come along with playing with them, and then you play them in just huge, massive arenas, both in space, in orbit, of planets, on the planet. So it's certainly a game that I think you may need a bigger or stronger PC to play at its optimal settings. But certainly, if you do have that, it may be a game worth checking out. So another game along those lines of Dreadnought, and it's a game that I'm going to check out because I think I might be able to actually play it. It's a game called Homeworld. Um, Again, not being a huge PC gamer, I'm not 100% familiar with it, but from what I've read and what I've seen, Homeworld was actually a really popular PC game back in the day. Unfortunately, its developer did come across some hard times, which being fans of console games, we're certainly familiar with that. Unfortunate downside of gaming. But luckily, Gearbox of all people stepped up and picked up the game, and I know a lot of people were worried about that at first, seeing how things went with the Aliens, Colonial Marines. I'll just say debacle. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard from people who are actually really big into PC gamings, from reviews of the convention and news of the convention, the game actually looks really, really good and plays really well as well. So that's good news if you're a fan of the series, and if it's a series that you think is worth checking out. That's also good news because like I said, you're going to be able to see what everybody was really excited about. So another PC game, which will be the last one I cover here, that I was really kind of intrigued about. Um, Now I'm not any good at them. I play them, but a new MOBA called Gigantic. Um, for me, like I said, I'm not very good at them. I get trash talked a lot too while playing Dota 2. But you know, Gigantic is more going to be more along the lines of a MOBA like Smite. It is a third-person view, over the shoulder view there. But the interesting thing, if you're a mobile player and you're familiar with those, and my limited understanding of it, is instead of having 3 lanes and you try to kill the towers, you have excuse me, you have 2 lanes, and you have to defend or kill a giant like guardian monster. Each team has one. So adding that aspect of the monster or the limited range, excuse me, there, certainly kind of modifies the MOBA experience, but then keeps it still relatively familiar for those who are fans of the MOBA game type. So PC games were certainly represented well, I think. There was quite a few of them out there that if you're a fan of them, you'll certainly be interested in looking at. I know they showed off an expansion for Guild Wars 2, which, as far as I know, is still a fairly popular game. So PC did get represented fairly well. As far as consoles, there was quite a bit of information for console games out there. If you're a fan of the games Hotline Miami or uh, State of Decay, you'll be happy to know that there are new games coming out for both of those. Um, I never played Hotline Miami, but it was considered one of the better indie type titles on the consoles when the first one came out. And from what I've seen and from what I've read, the new one is just as good, maybe even better. So that's always a good thing. But I did play State of Decay. I've always been a huge fan, speaking of PC games, of the DayZ game, if you're familiar with that. And unfortunately, we don't on consoles have a game that is exactly like that game. But State of Decay does come fairly close. I think it also kind of, excuse me, it also kind of shares maybe a little bit of the build your own adventure aspect that you get maybe from like the Walking Dead games by Telltale, but it also does incorporate the survival aspect of the game as well, of the DayZ game as well. So I enjoyed the 360 version, but certainly would be willing to purchase and play the next gen version as well. I would have to say, through all of the news and all of the information that came out, the big hitter, the big keynote, the prime presenter of the event was Gearbox. I think that was more along the lines because they were again in San Antonio, and Gearbox is a Dallas-based company. But for Gearbox, their big announcements or news that they provide were a lot centered around Borderlands, the Borderlands franchise. Um, Before PAX South started, they announced the Handsome Jack collection, which is the next gen port of Borderlands 2 and all of its DLC, including the Headhunter packs and then the pre sequel as well. They went into some more DLC information with the pre-sequel. If you're watching this video, the newest DLC, Sir Hammerlock's sister, playable character, as will have been released already to go along with the Handsome Jack's Doppelganger DLC that came out first for that as a playable character. They also, now they didn't necessarily announce it completely, but they did discuss that they are in the works for doing a campaign DLC for pre-sequel. I believe they mentioned that, which should be interesting, could potentially be centered around what it would be like to be in the mind or brain of Claptrap. So if it's anything like Tiny Tina's from Borderlands 2, it'll certainly be at the very least entertaining. So, and I think the big news, or at least for me, the most important news, being a Borderlands fan, was that they are, as they said, ready to work on Borderlands 3. I wouldn't call it an official announcement of Borderlands 3. I wouldn't even call it an official announcement that they're working on it currently. I would just call it that they are acknowledging that Borderlands 3 is on their radar. I know they're currently working on Battleborn, which certainly looks cool, a new IP that they're putting out. But knowing that they are beginning to discuss a option for Borderlands 3 is certainly intriguing. Borderlands has always been one of my all-time favorite games. You know, it's actually the last special edition game I purchased. I bought the Loot Chest edition for Borderlands 2. But knowing that they're putting out some feelers and getting things maybe possibly prepared for Borderlands 3 is kind of cool too. And then their announcement of trying to bring in some heavy hitters, trying to get some new developers, some new designers, as well as possibly getting feedback from the community for Borderlands 3 is also intriguing, because from the sounds of it, Borderlands 3 maybe shaping up to be a fairly large game. You know, is it going to be the Borderlands MMO? Maybe. Do they explore more than one vault this time? I mean, there was all those vaults at the end of Borderlands 2. It's hard to say, but just knowing that it's out there is uh, certainly grounds to be excited. So that is actually everything that I followed from Pax South. Now, with a lot of the games that I discussed, still being new to this YouTube thing and not really knowing kind of the ins and outs, I will go ahead and share some of the gameplay videos and trailers on the Facebook page, just until I kind of get the hang of things while doing this. But yeah, again, guys, I'm looking to make this into an actual series. You know, I'll do the other conventions and the other events that go on, as well as showing the videos from that. But again, thank you guys for taking the time to follow the video and follow the channel, as well as the support for the Facebook page. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, we'll go ahead and finish up killing Mr. Rancor here, and you guys enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.